everyone. Thanks for coming to our workshop on building an inclusive environment online. My name is Michelle Schwartz. I'm an educational developer here at the center, and I'll let my colleague Nada introduce herself.
And I'm Nada Savicevic, also educational developer at the center.
So this workshop will focus on thinking through an inclusive environment online from the lens of universal design for learning, which was a framework that was originally developed to think through how we can build a supportive environment for students with disabilities. So I just wanted to take the start of this workshop to kind of give an overview of the number of academic accommodations at Ryerson. So we've really seen over the last few years a big increase in the number of students requesting accommodations, and that was before the pandemic. So even before the pandemic, there was, for instance, like exponential increases in the number of students requesting use of the test center through an accommodation for disability. So you can see like the number of tests that were being administered through the test center. And we have 1 in 10 Ryerson students registered with academic accommodation support. So that number has only really increased over the course of the pandemic, as I'm sure all of you can imagine how that would happen. And so if you look at, for instance, registrants with AAS, and this is of course in the years before the pandemic, you have sort of some numbers of students with physical disabilities such as difficult seeing, hearing, physical mobility issues, brain injuries, et cetera. Then there's certain numbers of learning disabilities and sort of impairments to the ability to concentrate or focus in class, such as ADHD. And then by far largest number of students registered with academic accommodation support are for mental health disabilities, such as generalized anxiety disorder, depression, things like that. So just, to kind of give you an overview of the spectrum of registrants at Ryerson. So, and some of you may have seen this slide last year as well. In the transition to the remote campus, we really saw a lot of impacts on students with disabilities. So when you have a change in the learning environment, you have a change in the way that people are able to manage the way that they learn. So a lot of students, and this is both students with disabilities and without disabilities, that you develop study strategies, things that work for you, things that that you can do to succeed in the classroom. And then when you have a complete shift in the environment, there's a lot of impacts that can dislodge those kinds of strategies that were working pretty well. So for instance, if you have increased screen time, there's a lot of disability impacts that can happen from that, such as students with acquired brain injury or issues with migraines often have a lot of trouble with that. When you have content organized in different ways, then students have a lot of difficulty locating the information. When you have a change in the delivery platform, there's a lot of incompatibility with technology, and then a change in how the content is delivered leads to sort of increase in time spent on the course, and that kind of, what's the word? I can't think of it, but if you have even just a few minutes increased in each class, then kind of it adds up and creates a much larger amount of time required to spend on coursework. And of course, there's been a lot of interesting ways in which over the last year and a half, we've seen students and faculty members impacted by the needs to be in a remote campus. Like for some students, there were ways in which it actually benefited them. Students who had a lot of anxiety sometimes actually prefer to be in an online environment where they can have their camera off and take time away from interacting. So there's always like positives and negatives to any situation, but it's just something that is really good to keep in mind. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk for a bit, and then Nada will go into it in more detail onto this framework of universal design for learning. So the idea of universal design for learning came out of the universal design practices in industrial design and architecture and engineering. The idea is to create the maximally usable and accessible product or space for the greatest number of people. So if you design a space to be accessible to as many people as you can imagine with all sorts of different physical abilities and needs, then it's proactively an accessible space, and you don't have to add a ramp afterwards that is really kind of like when you see those stores where they just have the little plywood ramps that they've like pushed against the door in an attempt to make the space accessible. That's not proactive. That's a reactive view of accessibility. But for universal design for learning, it takes a lot of those principles and thinks, how can we make the learning environment maximally accessible from the outset instead of having to accommodate students afterwards. So it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say that there's one way to teach in an inclusive way. It's about thinking through what you do in the classroom and how you can make it the most proactively accessible to all students. And it's a sort of iterative process where, you go through a series of strategies, see what worked, reflect on them, adjust it, and keep changing. And it's also, responding to students, so giving students a lot of agency and shaping their own learning experiences. So I'll turn it over to Nada to give more of an overview.
Thanks, Michelle. So as Michelle said, universal design for learning in an educational context recognizes that people learn in different ways, and therefore learning environments should be flexible. So think about the ways you can take your course content and present it to students in multiple formats. For example, using a short video followed by maybe a discussion in a live session, Zoom or Google Meet, and then followed by some lecture notes that you share online could be a start of thinking how to incorporate universal design for learning in your course. Allowing students to participate and engage in a learning environment in many different ways is also another step. It might not be feasible to have everyone, if you have a large class, which number of us do, having everyone speak on Zoom, but using chat and having maybe a moderator so students can share their thoughts. Or if that's again not feasible because the class is really large and you don't have help, setting up a D2L discussion forum, discussion boards where they can participate asynchronously. And there's always a question like, but my class is very large, you can group your students. So then they are like, you're not looking at all of them at the same time. They can do summaries of this discussion. There are many ways to actually support that modality if the class is large, or maybe creating a poll that they can use in a live session anonymously also supports these principles. And then the last one, multiple means of expressing learning, is mostly tied to how we structure assessments. So thinking about different ways that you can allow students to demonstrate that they met the learning outcomes in some kind of flexible way, optional way, is also supporting this UDL. And that can be about maybe just allowing students to choose a method that they're assessed by. And so it's not always written form. There are other formats that you might be open to, or allowing students to choose the way of assessments also helps them. So let's take a closer look at each of these and also some examples that we prepared. And the first one, multiple means of representations, in many cases, providing course materials in electronic format will already enable students to access them easier. And we all witnessed that in the last year and a half, even though it was stressful to do it overnight. So making sure that these materials are designed properly and in accessible format is the next important step. And please do reach out to us. We do have in our center accessibility specialist that knows all about that, but we do as well. And please reach out to us for consults if you're wondering how you can do certain things to make these the content accessible. So multiple ways of representing information is one of the core principles of universal design, and it benefits everyone, as Michelle said at the beginning with the ramps. For example, just including a few video examples related to the topic you're teaching that you can find online. You don't have to even record them, but you know there are resources in addition to your lecture notes. It helps a lot, and including open educational resources, especially under current conditions in the last year, number of companies actually open their locked materials. It's a great way to provide access to free digital content that can be used in original format. And if it's open educational resource, it can be actually adapted to your needs in a number of ways. And as I said, we were just, it was interesting watching how a number of publishers and cultural institutions started providing free access to various resources due to the sudden move to remote teaching. And then if you have a personal story, maybe an anecdote or just professional experience outside of academia, you can share with your students that that providing an example of what you're teaching, supporting it, it helps with presenting core concepts in more than one way. Even if we don't think about that, it is actually presenting them through different ways. If you have course reading or you do a short lecture, you can also add some visual representation. Even though the course is not designed course, it still helps to support it in multiple ways. And the most important when dealing with any visuals, always provide a verbal explanation of slides, charts, graphs, any graphics, so that students are able to access these materials both visual and auditorily. And if you're posting your materials online, think about including image captions for all visuals. And again, we can help with all of that. And just quickly, I think we can all agree that after this experience, having a 3-hour lecture on Zoom might be too much for someone to sit through. And it's also certainly too much for someone to lecture for 3 hours on Zoom. So to avoid that, again, consider maybe pre-recording some of that materials, chunking your materials into short segments, no longer than 15 minutes. It helps. You can do this recording very simply by scheduling one-on-one Zoom. I think we are all Zoom masters by now. And of course, you can do voiceover PowerPoint slides, but these Zoom recordings will provide you with a video file, separate audio track, captions, and transcripts that also support UDL principles and build an inclusive learning environment. Students can view these materials before coming to the live session or joining maybe that setup discussion in D2L. And I am bad with that, but quick pointers for that is to try to speak slowly, which is my weakness for sure. And someone asked earlier about acronym that we had on the screen. Having an acronym or new terminology, just remember to speak out what it stands for, which we will do as well. And in other words, just remembering to reinforce those things is important since we cannot easily write on the board as we do in the classroom, in the physical space. So we need to say them aloud. We need to remember to say them, and mistakes happen, but just, try to keep something like that. Also avoid reading the slides, but rather try to add context, verbal explanation, analogies, and as I already said, some real life examples. And we included a link to this helpful resource that our colleagues prepared, how to record and share video and audio. And you will find a step-by-step explanation that it's really easy to follow. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more on multiple means of representation. And this is actually important and easy, not that difficult to do, that creating a clear course organization really helps creating that additional support for and building an inclusive learning environment. And it's important, of course, in any modality, but in this remote one even more. Students are directed through the learning experience by using the features of online environments. So making them clear and simple really helps them. And there are many ways to do that. For example, by outlining the order in which students should go through the course, prevents confusion and unnecessary emails asking what to do and where to find things. And then, as I talked before about videos and audio, including details about the type of the resource, for example, stating that the link is a video and including the length of the video really helps students assess, how much time and especially the ones who are using assisted technologies. And also similarly, if you require your students to do an activity, you might want to state how much time you expect them to spend on it. They might spend more time or less time, but just creating that clear structure and a learning map for your course, as well as defining expectation, is one of the important universal design principles that benefits everyone, not just students that might have difficulties. And saving a copy, in addition to your original slides, saving a copy of these slides as a reduced mobile-friendly PDF and providing both is also appreciated. Students often need quick access. They use a variety of devices for viewing. And we already know that there is a significant number of students who have unstable, slow, or limited access to the internet, happen to all of us, or insufficient data plans. So providing multiple formats will help them greatly. And again, we included these resources or advice on information on the upcoming workshops. So there is a session specifically focused on how to build a learning path in D2L, and it's coming up on August 25th. So please use the link to register, and we can share it in the chat as well if you'd like to learn more on this specific topic. Next slide, please. More about representation. Okay, I feel like I talked already. So just quickly, using a predefined slide layout provides the foundation for a consistent structure that I already talked about. So the semantics of the title and body placeholder fields in slides are conveyed to assistive technologies to provide extra context. And if you didn't have a chance to watch a video of how assistive technology works, it's really an eye-opener. Sometimes we might drop the title of the slide to accommodate the large graphic or chart, and that's certainly not the best idea. All slides should have a title, since it's the first thing that gets read to someone using a screen reader. It also helps everyone, not just students using assistive technology, because our brain processes consistent structure much quicker and easier, rather than figuring out the screen without a title. It's well known that we read and view digital content differently, but most often we just scan through it rather than carefully reading it. So breaking slides in order to have less text and more visuals is also a very good practice when thinking about universal design strategies. And just quickly, text size, I'm not sure about prescriptive, but our accessibility specialist said that no smaller than 18 points on slide. Equally important to take into consideration that content should be legible on small screens, because again, like we are all using mobile devices, and students certainly use their phones to go through the posted content quite often. And these percentages are always surprising to me, because data shows that more than 75% of students use mobile devices to complete their online coursework, and even more percentage-wise to log into our D2L. And one thing to point out is that the online slide layout is widescreen. I mean, now we have these templates. I think most of us transferred to these new templates. And in tech terms, that ratio is 16:9. So it's a longer horizontally, shorter vertically. And the space is much wider than a traditional PowerPoint 4:3 ratio, which looks more like a square. There is an additional benefit to that, since the wider screen provides us with more space, but also if you're recording your voiceover slides, that recording will be exported as a video, and this slide format will fit perfectly the video format, which is also 16:9. And let's not forget the proper use of color. Color is one of the most powerful elements of visual design, and I do teach visual design, and it's hard for me to get rid of some of the strategies that I used in the old times. But color should never be the only way of conveying information. We should definitely use color to emphasize, highlight, differentiate, but we should use it very wisely. And best practice is to use strong contrasting. There are actually platforms or apps that can tell you the contrast and you get pass or fail when you put the numbers for the colors. Someone actually, faculty just asked me this morning about contrast on one of the images. So bold colors that make your text stand out clearly from the background or for text are recommended. And you know, one of the ways that I learned from, again, our accessibility specialist is the best way to check if you actually, your slide have the good contrast is to look at them in grayscale. Just do a little test. And again, we have some resources on how to create accessible slides and we also have accessible slide templates that you can feel free to use. Next slide, please. The second one, multiple means of engagement with regards to assessments, having multiple ways for students to express themselves and demonstrate that they met learning outcomes by providing flexible assessment or flexible assignments is the best way to accomplish this one. And some of the options would be to select different types of assessments. For example, not having all written assignments or not having all lab reports, not having only midterm or final. And I know that many of us try to do that because of the current remote. So it was good experiment because we had to actually scaffold assessments differently than in a, you know, when we are in a physical space. And instead, so instead of doing these big ones, breaking up assignments, will allow students to demonstrate that they met the learning outcomes in a variety of ways. And again, like providing that flexibility and variety, different modalities are key to go. Another way of adopting flexible approaches with assessments can include flexible timelines. That's a trickier one, but you can invite students to decide the timelines that are appropriate for them instead of having to ask for accommodation and extension. And I'm not talking like free for all, submit wherever you want, but because there are lots of these accommodation and accession requests. So maybe letting students to be accountable to the timeline that they agree on with you is a way to go. And you can also invite, as I already mentioned, you can invite students to determine the weight of the assignment. So how they want their assignment to be distributed. That instead of high percentages for midterm and final, maybe have weekly or bi-weekly non-cumulative quizzes, just finding a middle ground with what you can handle and what would work for students. And finally, rubrics are very important and they should be focused on the concrete learning outcomes that you want for your students. So providing students with example and tips for success and possible ways of approaching assignments is also very helpful. One example of that is giving students a practice test to prepare for the marked one. And that's even more important in the online environment. You can check out these resources that we included, and these are actually recording of the previous workshops we facilitated. And as I said, reach out to us if you have more questions. Next slide, please. The last one, multiple means of expressions, is giving students a variety of ways to participate can be accomplished by incorporating small group and whole group discussion activities, both synchronously and asynchronously. And that helps, again, everyone, not only students, but instructors as well. For example, students can participate in a discussion on D2L discussion forums, or they can comment and provide peer feedback to each other on Google Doc, asynchronous type of activity, or synchronously in a live session. If you have a Zoom chat, you can send students to breakout rooms where they can discuss in smaller groups, and then they can work on a shared Google document, or they can come back and share what they learned as a whole class. They can do that also after the Zoom session. Not everything has to happen in that live session. Then sharing chat transcripts, which you can save, sharing captions and lecture notes also helps a lot. Like student surveys showed after the last year that that's what helped them a lot survive this remote environment. For example, we are recording this session. Zoom will automatically generate a chat transcript for it. So it won't be perfect because it's done automatically. I have an accent. I know there will be mistakes, but it's something that you can share with students afterwards. And similarly, if you have slides with lecture notes, you can just share those rather than recording the video if you're not comfortable with that. And check out the workshop. So I'll pass to Michelle now.
Thanks, Nada. And if you could do me a favor while I check, because I couldn't do it while I was sharing, is to add the slides to. Oh, I just noticed that there's that link on the bottom is an old link and won't work for this. If you could share the slides in the chat, that would be great.
Sure.
So thanks, Nada, for doing that that overview. I just wanted to present something. I saw this at a conference a couple of weeks ago that was specifically on UDL, and it was about using the UDL framework as a way of thinking about how to troubleshoot specific things that are happening in your classroom and thinking through basically a kind of a model for troubleshooting your teaching. And I thought it was super interesting. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about it today and see what people think. So the idea, and this is the link to the Twitter handle of the person, Jen Pusateri, who presented it. The idea is to say you have a challenge. So identify a problem or concern or something that's happening in the classroom that you want to work on. And then think about the impacted area of instruction. So whether it's an issue of how the course content is represented, like how you're presenting it to students. If it's an issue of engagement, so the ways that the students are able to participate and engage in the learning experience, or if it's a matter of expression, which is sort of that assessment component and how students are demonstrating that they've learned. Then, like brainstorm, right? So you have strategy. So what have you tried in the past? And then like, what are some new ideas that you could try based on sort of thinking through it from a UDL framework? And then there's that period of sort of iterative design, like thinking about how did it go, potentially surveying students or asking them for feedback in some way to see if it was effective for them. And then thinking through like, okay, well then what are my next steps for moving forward? So just to give some examples of how this would work. So here is a specific challenge. So some of the students are missing course content and opportunities to participate due to absences from class. So that could be like disability related absences. It could be compassionate leave. It could be any number of reasons why students aren't able to come to class. So that's sort of issues of expression, right? So they're missing the course content, they're missing your presentation of it. And then there's the issues of engagement. So they might be missing their opportunities to participate. And so then you have the UDL strategy, a lot of which Nada has talked about already, like just making sure that the slides and guided lecture notes are up in D2L. You have the opportunity now that we have these Zoom licenses to record class or record your lecture, or recording supplementary material that you can share as videos or podcasts, or even just the transcript, right? Like if you record to the cloud, and we've been talking about this within the chat for this presentation. If you record your lectures to the cloud, Zoom will automatically generate a transcript and caption file, and you can even kind of just share that. And then offering students the opportunity to participate outside of class through, the D2L discussion boards. There's the Google Form option. There's building things in Google Docs, for instance, like a collaborative document or a collaborative spreadsheet. So there's a lot of different options that you can think through to kind of work with the challenge of students missing the opportunity to get the content in class. And we have some resources there at the bottom. So the link that will be in the slides to generating the captions and transcripts will explain all the instructions for turning on different features in Zoom, such as the live captions. And then there's also some instructions for setting up online discussions in D2L. So here's another comment. This is a very, very common. This is one of the most frequently given accommodations on our campus. And it's also something that students have been really asking for, even without accommodations over the course of the pandemic. So my students need extra time on their midterms or final exams. And so if you have a class of say 200 students, you could have 10 students, for instance, or 20 students that have need for extra time, and they might actually have different kinds of time requirements. And then you have to go into D2L and you have to set all the different things, or you have to send them to the test center. So this is like an impacted area of instruction is expression, right? It's very directly tied to assessment. So then thinking through like, okay, so what are some UDL strategies to address this challenge. And so that's like the idea is to think, well, how do I make these midterms or final exams maximally accessible to reduce the need of individual accommodations for students? Like obviously there will always be students who have a specific accommodation that needs to be met because of the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, but you can reduce the numbers or you can make things more accessible for the greater number of students. So you can scaffold opportunities for students to complete portions of the assessment over the course of the semester. You used to take one major assessment and you break it down into little chunks where they might get some automated feedback or peer assessments along the way, but just like complete portions of the assignment rather than one major assessment all at the same time. There's the opportunity to set up low stakes self-grading practice quizzes in D2L to give students the opportunity to practice, get automated feedback, and to practice with the exam format so that they're like really kind of ready for what the tests will look like. Or you can even think about using sort of untimed open book exams that are submitted instead of through quizzes, the quiz tool in D2L. You might use the assignment Dropbox where the student can kind of complete an open book exam instead. And we have some links at the bottom for designing take-home exams or creating online quizzes in D2L. So this was one that Jen gave as an example in her presentation at the conference, and I thought it was a really good one, which was, the same few students do all the talking in, like say you're having your class as a Zoom and you ask the students to participate and everybody turns off their camera and mutes their mic except for like 2 students that do all the talking, and you never get anyone else to participate. Which can be frustrating for everyone around. Probably the other students are annoyed. You're kind of frustrated as the faculty member because you never see anybody. This is an issue of expression, right? It's an issue of students being able to participate. So what are some like strategies that would appear due to a sort of in a UDL framework? There's kind of creating a back channel. So giving students another way to participate. So maybe you have a Google Doc open that you share and everyone can see the contributions that everyone's making. There's also Jamboard, which gives you kind of a more collaborative Google visual product. Students can draw and write and draw pictures and kind of create like a mind map or like a mood board. Or there's other kinds of external tools like Padlet. Padlet gives you kind of like Post-it notes. And so there's like, you can have those kinds of things up and it allows people to share in different ways. And then, once again, it's always like an issue of asking students what they want, giving them some agency over it, and then like reviewing what worked and what didn't. So maybe the issue is that students don't feel comfortable participating under their name, right? Like that it's a difficult subject matter, it's very difficult to grasp. They're worried that people will think they're stupid or that their idea is bad, or they're worried that they're going to cause like a kind of a controversy and people are going to fight with them. So maybe there's something that can be done through anonymous participation. So like polling programs like Google Forms or Mentimeter or Kahoot, right? The students tend to really love Kahoot. I think it looks absolutely hideous and I hate the music it plays, but every time we've had grad students like teach mini lessons in our program, they always set up like 7 Kahoots. But it's something that you can create to allow for sort of anonymous participation options that are also very like easy and low stakes. And so we have some resources at the bottom as well for thinking through how you might set up Google Forms or collaborative activities using Google products. And this was one, it was just a very common one that's come up over the course of the last year and a half, right? So it's, some of the students are struggling with anxiety, feelings of isolation, sort of feeling like they're not connecting with their fellow students, that, it's hard to make friends, especially if they're like first years and they've never even been on campus. It's like a really kind of an issue of overall well-being, and that can impact all 3 areas of instruction, right? The students may not be able to really take in the course content. They may not want to participate and they could be doing really badly on assessments, right? Like there's all sorts of ways that can have an impact. So we just have some suggestions here that you might want to consider. The students, I can't remember what their student group was called, but it's a student group that advocated for mental well-being. And they developed a statement that got approved up to Senate, that you can put in your course outline in support of mental well-being, like so that when students go through their syllabus, they'll know, oh, like this is a faculty member that is really interested in me and cares about this. We have this remote services slideshow that's available. It was developed by Student Services, and it just gives an overview to students. You can put it up, say, on breaks if you have like a Zoom lecture or before class starts, and it just reviews all the services that are available to them remotely. Should they want to take part in tri-mentoring program, counseling services, like all sorts of things that are available to them. And then just, we had a faculty member, Lori Beckstead in FCAD, who made a bunch of suggestions, a lot of which Nada covered, asynchronous course materials, fewer assignments where possible, trying to keep in mind the lack of access to different kinds of technology or private spaces that students have, like all sorts of things like that to keep in mind. And we have a resource as well that you can explore at your leisure. You can, always think through this model if you find it helpful, thinking about your problem and then, like what strategies that you could potentially use to adjust your teaching, and really do reach out to us if you have any questions or you want to just talk through or brainstorm something. We have, links to some of the information on UDL, and do reach out to us with any questions. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you've tried something and it's worked really well, we also love to hear about that.